Hey there, welcome back to the Energy MD podcast, where we help you resolve your chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID naturally so that you can get back to living your best life. So, I'm your host, Evan Hirsch, and today we're going to be talking about what to do if you've been treated for Lyme disease and you're not better. So typically you may have had symptoms like chronic fatigue, like you're tired all the time, post-exertional malaise, where when you start to move or you exercise, you feel worse. Maybe you've even got POTS or orthostatic hypotension. Maybe you go from a sitting to a standing position and you get lightheaded, or maybe your heart starts to race. Maybe you've got brain fog, body pain, sleep issues, joint pain, and anxiety, depression. I mean, you can have so many different symptoms that are related to Lyme disease and its co-infections. And so let's say you had these symptoms and you go and you see somebody, a naturopath, a functional medicine doctor, an integrative medicine doctor, a Lyme specialist, and they treat you. So maybe they give you herbs, maybe they give you antibiotics, but you have some sort of treatment. And the treatment can last 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Hopefully, you don't feel too badly as you're going through this process. Oftentimes, that's the case, and that's something we can talk about later. But you go through a process where they are attempting to get rid of the Lyme disease. And maybe you feel better at the end, and maybe you don't. And this video really is for those times when you go through that process and you don't feel better. Or maybe you feel a little bit better, but you're not all the way better. Maybe your energy goes from a 4 or 5 out of 10 to a 5 or 6 out of 10, but you don't get to that 8, 9, or 10 out of 10, which is really what we're looking for so you can get back to living your best life. So what's happening? Why didn't it work? Let's say you got the testing done and the testing showed you had Lyme disease, which is otherwise known as Borrelia. Maybe the test showed you had Bartonella or Babesia or Anaplasma, or maybe they didn't show any of those. Maybe they just showed Borrelia, and so you treated for that. So a couple of things are happening, and generally it's what you're missing, right? So if you are relying on laboratory tests, that's the first problem. So testing for Lyme disease is typically done with a serology test, which is looking at the immune system's reaction to a particular infection. You're going to look at Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, etc., and you're going to look at the immune system's reaction to that particular infection. Now, when you have Lyme disease and other chronic illnesses or other related illnesses or other related causes that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, your immune system is dysfunctional, which basically means if you're asking the immune system to give you a reaction to a particular infection, it may not be able to do so. So consequently, you may have Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia floating around in your body, but they may not show up on a laboratory test. And consequently, if it doesn't show up on a laboratory test and the provider is focused on that laboratory test and they're only going to treat you if that laboratory test is positive, then you're not going to be treated for that particular illness or that particular infection. So consequently, after you've gone through a period of time of treatment for one infection, but you haven't been treated for other infections, that could be the reason why you're not better yet. The other thing that's missing is potentially what I call the toxic five. So this is a combination of all of the toxins and infections and nervous system dysfunction that I have found that ends up causing a lot of the symptoms that I mentioned: fatigue, brain fog, body pain, sleep issues, muscle pain, etc., joint pain, etc. So really important to note that 9 times out of 10, it's never just one thing. It's never just the Lyme disease or just the Borrelia. So the toxic five that I'm referring to are a combination of heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and nervous system dysfunction or trauma that has built up in the body over time. Now, whenever I see somebody and I'm doing an assessment and determining why they're not better yet, it's always because they're missing something. Okay, so each one of these on their own can cause all the symptoms that we've talked about: the fatigue, the brain fog, the body pain, etc. And so when you have them in combination, that's really when people have trouble. And that's really when it starts significantly compromising your life. When you go from requiring just a little bit of caffeine in order to function on a day-to-day basis to really not functioning well at all, not being able to remember things, having a hard time getting out of bed, not being able to support your family at home, not being able to do your best at work, not being able to go out at night, go out on the weekend, travel on vacations, when you notice that your health and your energy has been significantly compromised and you start having all of these weird symptoms. So that's because there is this combination. And so everyone that I see who's got chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a combination of significant fatigue to the point of exhaustion, oftentimes with post-exertional malaise and postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or POTS, a combination also including brain fog, sleep issues, body pain, all of those things. And you don't have to have all of those to have chronic fatigue or to need help, but oftentimes they're having those symptoms or symptoms that started after a virus since 2020, otherwise known as long COVID. So all of those causes are going to contribute to these different syndromes or different disease states. So then what's the treatment? Well, the treatment is to address everything. It's to address what's missing with treatments that actually work. So what we do in our program is we go through a process where I don't even test anymore for these things because I know from doing this work for the last decade that when I've done testing every 3 months previously, I found that the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, they all came out. They all came out in the urine, they all came out in the blood at some point during the process. And part of that is also because a lot of these toxins and infections are bound up together. And so consequently, if you start to remove heavy metals, you're also going to be removing infections at the same time. So you may not show up with infections on your laboratory test, and maybe that's because the immune system is not functioning correctly, but maybe it's because the infection is bound up with the heavy metal. And so when you start removing the heavy metal, all of a sudden now you're releasing infection that can be addressed if you've got things planned accordingly. So as we take people through a process and we give them a spreadsheet of exactly what they're going to be doing, for the most part, I shouldn't say exactly because you end up pivoting a lot through the program. I give you my best guess based on the intake form that you fill out of what you're going to be taking for the next 12 months to make sure that you address all of your causes. But inherently, everybody's an individual, and the way we personalize it is the feedback that you provide us as you're ramping up on these tinctures to go after each of these causes. But eventually, after the first 6 months, you're addressing the heavy metals, all the chemicals, all the molds, all the infections, and you're doing the nervous system retraining process. So hopefully it makes sense to you that when you are addressing all of the causes, that there's no place to go except for success, except to get to the finish line. Because, there's probably some causes out there that we're not aware of that, but maybe we're addressing 95 to 99% of all the causes, but maybe there's something out there that we just don't understand yet. But the reality is that when we go through this process and we're using herbs and binders and chelating agents, all natural, they're doing double and triple duty, and we're making sure that we're addressing the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and the nervous system dysfunction, all of the toxic five that need to be addressed. So if you are struggling because you have Lyme disease, you've been diagnosed, or you think you have Lyme disease and you've been treated, but you're still not better, it's because you're missing something. So please, please, please get help. Figure out what are the other causes that you have, or in our case, get treated. If you're interested in seeing whether we can help you, I have free calls where we can get on there and I do an assessment to determine whether or not I can help you. About a third of the time, I tell people that I don't think that we're a good fit. So it's not a foregone conclusion. And it really doesn't make sense for me to accept you into my program if you're not going to get better, which is why I go through this process. So really important to make sure you're addressing the toxic five. And if you want our help and you're ready to invest your time, your energy, and your money in a solution that actually works, go ahead and click on the link below this video and let's have a chat. It's really low pressure. I just want to see whether or not we're a good fit. And if we are, then we can talk about next steps and we can go into what's included in the program. All right, hopefully this was helpful for you today. Whatever you do, take action, whether it's working with us, whether it's working with somebody else. The most important thing is to keep moving forward Keep asking powerful questions. Keep doing the mindset work, the mindfulness, the nervous system retraining. If that's all you've got right now, do that work because it's so important. And then make sure that you're addressing the toxic five over a period of time with treatments that actually work. All right, I hope that was helpful. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Have an amazing day. I hope you learned something on today's podcast. If you did, please share it with your friends and family and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It's really helpful for getting this information out to more people who desperately need it. Sharing all the experts I know and love and the powerful tips I have is one of my absolute favorite things to do. Thanks for being part of my community. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. It is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Thanks for listening and have an amazing day.